Okay, so good evening and welcome to tonight's forum. I am Mike Shodroff. I'm the co-president of the Alliance for New Jersey Environmental Education, affectionately known as ANJE. And as a collaborative effort between ANJE and the New Jersey School of Conservation, affectionately referred to as the NJSOC, I am really excited for this evening's presentation, which is place-based climate change at the NJSOC. Tonight, you will hear from Kerry, Kirk, Pflugh, who is the president of the Friends of the NJSOC, Liz Carletta, a doctoral research assistant at Montclair State University, Frank Gallagher, who is the environmental planning program director at the Rutgers School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, and Dave Robinson, our New Jersey state climatologist out of Rutgers University. ANJE has a pretty long history with the NJSOC, and I was really happy to be a part of their successful efforts to reopen the doors so that they can continue to be a destination where citizens of New Jersey and the world can learn to become better stewards of our natural resources. The history of ANJE's friends, members, leaders is so intertwined with the School of Conservation. I'm sure you'll understand why they'd want to be by the end of this hour. Before we officially get started, just some simple Zoom housekeeping. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but I just ask that everyone stay on mute while our speakers are sharing their thoughts. Should you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. There will be a Q&A at the end, and we'll certainly have an opportunity to get to your questions. That's simple. Now, before I ask Kerry to introduce herself, I do want to give a quick update regarding the New Jersey climate change standards. ANJE has a seat on the New Jersey Commission on Environmental Education, and we actually had a call this morning with First Lady Tammy Murphy. She was the first to express her disappointment with the resolution that the State Board of Education adopted that extends the implementation date for the 2020 climate standards for science, visual and performing arts, world languages, and career readiness, life literacy, and key skills to September of 2022. And I'm just going to read a little section of the resolution. It says the closure of school facilities and disruption to in-person learning due to the COVID-19 public health emergency have made it difficult for many school districts to engage in the curriculum writing processes necessary to meet the original implementation schedule for the 2020 New Jersey student learning standards. Therefore, to provide relief to districts and allow them to focus their efforts and resources on ensuring safe and healthy school environments and providing high quality instruction, the revised schedule adopted today grants districts an extension until September of 2022 to implement all 7 content areas of the 2020 New Jersey student learning standards. Should you have any questions regarding this change, feel free to email me at info@anje.org. I will share the resolution with you upon request. And although I have to say, she totally understands and empathizes with the rationale behind the delay, First Lady Murphy said, we're already behind because of the impacts that are happening due to climate change, especially in New Jersey. The good news is that Tammy Murphy is a champion for environmental education. She speaks our language, so we have a clear ally in the State House. That being said, I do know that organizations such as ANJE and the NJSOC will continue to offer programs and professional development to get our formal and non-formal educators ready for the implementation of these standards, including the amazing panel that ANJE will be hosting on Monday night next week called Climate Change Education in New Jersey, and I'll drop the link for that in the chat box. But I could also say with confidence, we have some of the finest educators in the nation, and many are already teaching this information in their indoor and outdoor classrooms. So, we're in good hands. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to Kerry to get the real focus of tonight's forum started. So Kerry, please take it away.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to share my screen. So just give me a moment, folks, to get it up and running. Are we good? Can everyone see it? Okay. I'd first like to thank Mike and Angie for giving the Friends of the New Jersey School of Conservation the opportunity to talk about program opportunities there and explain the status of the school and the activities that are being scheduled and planned. I'm Kerry Kirk Pflugh. I'm the president of the Friends of the New Jersey School of Conservation, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight and so pleased about this partnership that we have with Angie. But first, let me give you a little background on the Friends and a short history of the role that the School of Conservation has played in the evolution of place-based education. The Friends of the School of Conservation was launched in 1987 to serve as an independent support group, assisting and providing financial support, curriculum, materials, special events and celebrations, and restoration projects. But the most significant contribution the Friends have made to date is the successful negotiation with the state of New Jersey to reopen the School of Conservation after its previous managers closed it and returned it to the state. This limited access agreement allows the Friends to provide 5 mission-specific day programs per month. These programs run the gamut from family and public programming to the climate change programs and education efforts that you're going to hear more about shortly from Liz. The School of Conservation is our nation's oldest and largest environmental education center. At its core was an approach to education that has been both place-based and experiential in application. It played a key role in the development of environmental education movement and has served as a model for environmental centers throughout the world. The School of Conservation's resident programs and summer camps have served nearly 500,000 students, teachers, master's and doctoral candidates, faculty, and visiting professionals from every walk of life through its nearly 40,000 workshops and environmental education programs offered in its 72-year history. The story of the School of Conservation, however, actually begins in the early 1930s when the Civilian Conservation Corps built a lake, a dam, several buildings, and a camp to live in while they served their country, engaging in conservation management projects. But when they departed Stoke State Forest, the CCC camp was forgotten. That is until the legendary Dr. L.B. Sharp, famous for the National Life Camps, stumbled across the abandoned camp and saw its potential as an outdoor education field center. He, along with a group of educators and legislators led by Senator Alfred Lytell, convinced Governor Alfred Driscoll of the value of such an education center. So on Memorial Weekend in 1949, the school officially welcomed its first group of students, largely from urban centers, establishing a focus on inclusion that has been sustained throughout its history and before the concept of equity in education was widely practiced. During this early period, the School of Conservation's philosophical approach to education can best be described as that which can be best learned in the out of doors through direct experience and dealing with native materials and life situations should there be learned. Clearly, a foundational concept in place-based education. Dr. D. Alton Partridge, the first director of the School of Conservation, designed and implemented field courses to enrich school curriculum and provide future teachers with the necessary skills and ability to work comfortably with children in a natural setting. In 1957, Dr. Edward Ambry, the second director of the School of Conservation, helped to expand the reach of this philosophical perspective by entering into a cooperative agreement between the 6 state colleges then in existence to provide training in conservation education at the School of Conservation to all students enrolled to become educators. As the decade grew to a close, Mr. Clifford Emanuelson, the fourth director, made a gradual transition in the philosophy of the School of Conservation by focusing on curriculum enrichment through conservation field study and developing programs that would establish a sensitivity and awareness of the importance of natural resource management in students. In the early 1960s, the public was becoming increasingly aware of public health impacts from environmental contamination. This public awakening of man's role in and responsibility for respect and protection of the planet inspired fifth director, Dr. John J. Kirk, to place a greater emphasis on the development of a reverence for life through an ecological investigation of the interdependence of living things with the goal of forming a land ethic demonstrating man's temporary stewardship of the land. During this period, natural resource management instruction went from the general to a more specific local level. Education programs expanded from primarily teacher training and professional development to year-round residential programs at the elementary school level. Environmental assessment surveys conducted in the communities in advance of each visiting school group's arrival made it possible for the school conservation staff to make lessons more relevant by focusing on the resources and issues in their own communities. This approach began the shift away from conservation education to the broader interconnected concept of environmental education and was reflected in 4 curriculum areas: natural sciences, humanities, social studies, and outdoor pursuits. As the century came to an end, the 6th director, Dr. Bill Thomas, facilitated discovery and learning through research and conservation. The school also saw a resurgence in teacher training and professional development. Some of the professional development programs covered subjects such as biodiversity, sustainability, herpetology, and forensics entomology. Research also included an introduction of a weather station operated by Rutgers University as part of the climate change network. The station is still operating on the campus now and transmitting data, adding to our knowledge of climate change in the northwestern part of the state. Dr. Robinson and Frank Gallagher will be talking more about the station and sharing some ideas for continued study and programming. Finally, I'd like to say that the School of Conservation has always transformed and evolved to address the changing needs of students and educators. The Friends of the New Jersey School of Conservation are committed to continuing the mission and purpose of the School of Conservation, and we hope you'll reach out to us with suggestions for programs you might like to conduct there. Ultimately, the School of Conservation's success and endurance as a place of learning lies in its original approach to instruction, which is discovery through field study. Its future lies in the continuation of its philosophy of inclusion and place-based education with an emphasis on climate change. Thank you. Liz?
Thank you so much, Kerry. I appreciate it. I don't have any slides to share, so you can see everybody in the room now. And I'll be very brief. Again, my name is Liz Carletta, and Mike had said earlier that I am a current PhD candidate at Montclair State University. I'm studying teacher education and teacher development, which means professional development programming. And I am a former high school educator myself, high school biology. And before that, I was an informal educator at the Bergen County Zoo and Jenkinson's Aquarium and various little nature camps in my young days. So that's my background coming here. And when I became a teacher through Montclair State University, part of my teacher preparation was actually held up at the New Jersey School of Conservation. So it is also a part of me becoming a formal educator, or my history of becoming a formal educator as well. So it's really a great place. I think many of you have been there for sure. I'm not sure if everyone has been, but it's definitely worth a visit. And if you are a teacher in New Jersey and you'd like to learn more about the new climate change standards and how to implement them, I will be running 3 workshops up at the School of Conservation. They're designed specifically for classroom teachers, formal teachers, to implement the standards into the classroom, although we would welcome informal educators as well. And the first one is for K-5 teachers, so elementary school teachers, to come learn about climate change and how to implement the new standards in their classroom. That one will be held on Wednesday, July 28th. It's an all-day workshop up at the School of Conservation from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The second workshop will be for teachers of grades 6 through 12 who don't teach science. So if you're not comfortable with the science of climate change, that's not a problem. You also will be responsible for implementing this into your curriculum. So the workshop is designed specifically for those teachers. Again, the non-science grades 6 through 12 teachers, and that will be on Wednesday, August 18th, again, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., using as much of the day as we can up at the School of Conservation. And then for science teachers who already may know some of the science behind climate change, how to implement these programs, or these new standards rather. That program will be on Wednesday, October 13th. It is likely a school day for most of you, but hopefully this is relevant enough that you could get a professional development day out of it. And that will be from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So it's just a little bit shorter. Kerry, you mentioned this also in your talk, so I was interested to hear that. These programs come from a place of place-based education, which is a part of my own dissertation studies, as well as an equity ethic in teaching. And so I hope that it comes together nicely for both the School of Conservation and the teachers out there who may need some further preparation to help implement these standards. I knew I'd be quick. I will go ahead and pass it over to Frank, but I'm available afterwards for questions if you should have any.
Thanks, Liz. As Mike opened up here a little earlier, I was kind of thinking back and listening to Mike, and as a founding member and past president of the Alliance, and as a past chair of the Governance Commission on Environmental Education, I want to offer Mike my sincerest condolences, because I kind of know where you're going through, Mike. And what I really like to say is thanks for keeping up the good fight. So with that, let me share my slides here. My current position with the Department of Landscape Architecture and the Urban Forestry Lab, allows me to both teach and get into some research. So I would hope that everybody right about now can see my slides. I'm assuming that you can. Can I get a verbal response on that?
We can. You're good.
Okay. So what I thought I'd do tonight is to talk a little bit about sort of the forest legacy we have here in the northern part of the state, at least, or most of the Northeast, actually. And then move into some research that is going on and stuff that hopefully you can use, and finally end up with some thoughts about how to integrate it all together. So yeah, I known the School of Conservation for quite a long time, and back in the early 80s as an naturalist at High Point State Park and as one of the faculty members at the Pflugh College, I used to do a lot of programs at the School of Conservation. And thanks for showing that photograph of me up at the school there, Kerry. Appreciate it. And I realize that it's really embarrassing to show old photographs of yourself, so you shouldn't do that. But the School of Conservation was really a special place. The folks there, John and Jerry and Regina and Randy and later Bill, they left their footprint there. That their footprint will always be with that place and the vegetation itself. And let's be honest about it, in that there have been many peoples over thousands of years who've left an indelible footprint on that landscape. In fact, 1,000 years ago, Native Americans of the area, in fact, Native Americans of most of North America, was using fire as a tool for both wildlife management and agriculture. And interestingly, that footprint's still around. And there's some real evidence of quick changes that happened during those times. Here's a graph of ice core data of CO2 concentration and proposed temperature, estimated temperature of the area over the past 1,000 years. And what's really interesting to me, and what I've circled here, is a period between like 1500 and 1600, when the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere around actually plummeted. And it correlates directly with the time when the Native American population, which around 1400 was probably in the 60 million range for the North America, plummeted as a result of the smallpox epidemic. And as the population plummeted by about 90%, so did the use of fire. And what happened, the trees grew back. And as those trees grew back, of course, they sequestered carbon. And that's that dip you see in the graph there of the carbon concentration. And then, of course, if you look into the middle of the 1700s, and as we get into the 1800s, when most people think the Anthropocene began and the Industrial Revolution really set foot, you see it really starting to skyrocket. And one of the reasons the concentration of carbon dioxide was skyrocketing is because, especially in this area, in Sussex County especially, the mining industry had come to the area. In fact, Sussex County was one of the mining centers of the country, between Long Pond Iron Works, Ringwood, and the Andover mine, which, by the way, was actually protected during the Civil War by the Union Army because it was so valuable. The furnaces, they were burning a lot of wood. Wood, of course, that was first made into charcoal and then burned. But one furnace would actually burn about 3 acres worth of wood in a day. And these furnaces would run for months at a time. And so the landscape that we're looking at between now, which, looks like mature forest, was cut over several times before it got into the stage we see today. And even the stage we see today, it has it's been impacted by our cultural endeavors for a long time. There was, after the Civil War and we get into the 1800s, Teddy Roosevelt comes along with this idea, hey, wait a minute, guys, we're running out of timber. The United States is going to face a timber famine if we continue. And so they begin to protect lands, him and his crew of Pinchot and others. They say, hey, we have to protect lands. We have to stave off the timber famine. And that idea caught on. And in fact, Governor Stokes at the time donated the first 500 acres of land that would become Stokes State Forest, in which, of course, the School of Conservation would sit. And so the protection of land for the conservation of timber became a thing, a political asset, actually. And then, of course, the other Roosevelt president comes along, as Kerry mentioned, in the 30s, and through the New Deal, he puts people to work in these forests through the Civilian Conservation Corps. And one of the things that the CCC did, as Kerry mentioned, they created a lot of lakes, they built a lot of infrastructure, but I think the most important thing that they did in the 9 years of their existence was to plant 3.5 billion, that was a B, 3.5 billion trees. And that undertaking alone, I think, changed the face of some of our forests. In our area here, the trees that were planted were primarily red pines. And so we have a bunch of red pine stands throughout both Stokes, a little bit in High Point, that still remain from that planting. But my real interest in forest legacy actually didn't begin when I was up at Stokes and High Point, but rather when I moved down to Liberty State Park. Because there, what I saw was an old rail yard full of just cinder and ash, totally human-generated soils, all on fill. And yet, in a very short time, an urban forest had developed. And because of its location, we had some really nice aerial photographs that we were able to actually translate into vegetation data and look at how the cinder and ash turned first into herbs and then shrubs and then woodlands, and then the wetlands began to gather. And within a period of 30 years or so, we were able to really document the changes in that forest. And what amazed me is how quick the forest actually developed. And so we were looking at that, and we were really trying to understand that. And the deeper we dove into the data, the thing that really struck me was that it wasn't sort of a linear progression of events, but rather things would go along pretty steadily. And then all of a sudden you hit a point, a threshold, which would be punctuated by a big change. The graph you're looking at on top looks at basically how much productivity is in an area of the park. And then the graph on the bottom is what the soil metal contamination is. And you'll notice that things go along pretty well. And the soils have to be fairly contaminated before the vegetation really starts to show a dip in productivity. The graph on the bottom basically looks at leaf area index. And basically you're looking at the forest canopy in 4 different sites, and goes along fairly well. And then all of a sudden between 2012 and 2013, it changes. And we expect it to change then because, as everybody knows, on October 29th, Sandy came ashore in New Jersey and did a lot of damage. And of course, the physical damage is going to change the canopy structure to some extent. That wasn't unusual and that wasn't unexpected. But what was unexpected was that it did not recover. And we've been doing this data, it goes up to 2016. We have it right up until last year. And the data is basically the same. And so here is one of those threshold things where things change relatively quickly. And there's a couple of reasons why it may have changed. We were thinking about, well, how do we really look at that? And we came up with the idea of looking at tree cores and saying, okay, how much growth is really happening over time, and where do these changes occur? And on these two tree cores, these are just 1/8-inch drills that we drill into a tree and pull out a tree core with. You can see the pith right about here in the middle, and you can see that things go along and growth is fairly good for a period of time. And then you can see pretty quickly, dramatically, those changes happen and things really slow down. And from the data from Liberty, that slowdown happened right in accordance with when Sandy occurred. And so that got me thinking about the School of Conservation in Stoke State Forest and the red pines that are planted up there. As we said, most of them were planted by the CCCs in the 30s, and the photograph on the left is a picture of one of those, along with my dog in the photograph. I didn't actually notice that until now. And the photograph that's on the right, and the photograph on the left is Piney Point. Now, Piney Point was planted a little later. It was planted in the 50s by Boy Scouts, but still, there's 80 years of records here in these pine trees. And so the other interesting part about this is that red pine, Pinus resinosa, actually is at the southern extreme of its functional range. In fact, there probably would be very little, if any, red pine here had it not been for the CCCs. And so in some ways, there is stress on this population. It's not really in its optimal environment. And so the effects of climate change may show up more quickly in this species because it's at the edge of its functional range. And so we got to thinking about that, and we're just beginning work pulling on some of the tree core data and to see what shows up there. And this happens to be one of the trees from the road going into the School of Conservation there. And there's some accumulated data below. And this data is very early, and so you can't make any conclusions about it. But what I think is fairly obvious, even this early data, and don't worry about, we know that trees, when they get bigger, and you have to do the math to make sure that you're really measuring pure growth, and we did all that stuff. But you can see that if I were to draw a mean through here, the mean during these stages would be somewhere around here. And if I were to draw a mean in this stage, it would be around here, and somewhere in here, the change occurs. So here, what we're seeing in some of the red pine at the School of Conservation is that the change in the growth rates is not linear, that it really is exhibiting, or we think it is exhibiting, a real threshold model where the trees have hit a wall and are starting to decline pretty rapidly. And the implications for this for forest management is one thing, but the other thing that it does is allows us to build a much better, more accurate model of how the vegetation communities will shift as the climate warms and as climate changes. And the nice thing about the red pine is that there's also a lot of data from the forest industry in the north, up around Ontario, where the trees are really strong. And so we have a good comparison of the different areas of its range and how fast growth is changing in those two areas. So that's a little bit about, I think, how there's a lot of research out there that actually can be used. And what I really enjoy about it is that we now can take this, and because of what Dave Robinson's going to talk about in a minute, we can take this and we can marry it to climate data. So in these sets of graphs I threw up now has the growth of the canopy on the bottom graph, and it has some climatological data and weather data up on top. And we can look through these and start to play around with statistics and see what the correlates are. And we've done this for several sets of data at Liberty State Park. And one of the things we came up with is a real strong correlation, not to strictly temperature and a little bit more to rainfall, but more soil moisture. The soil moisture has really changed in the past 10 to 15 years, where we get 2 or 3 weeks of really dry weather and hot weather in the middle of summer. And in fact, some of the rings you saw on the birch data were false rings. where the tree growth slows down so much during the summer that it creates a what looks like an annual ring, which is actually a false ring. And the stuff we're seeing from Sandy is probably the result of having, brackish water cover soils for so long that they changed the mycorrhizal flora, and things have really shifted because of that. So this data is available, and what I like about it also is that you don't have to be a PhD a scientist to kind of look at this. There's plenty of supplemental activities out there that you can start to marry to now as we begin to post the data from the School of Conservation. And I can even post data from other places in the state. We can then begin to make this local. And when you make it local and you make it concrete, that's when it becomes real. So I'm kind of excited about not only the research from its academic perspective, but how we can then use this research to make climate change a real subject down as far as whatever the fourth grade or whatever the standards are going to call for. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Robinson, the state climatologist, and I'll stop sharing.
All right, and I will start sharing. All right, let's get going here. All right, good evening, everyone. It's tough acts to follow. Just 3 excellent presentations preceding this one. I'm gonna be the anchor leg here and just give you a taste of the data, the information on weather and climate that are available to let your imagination start running wild of what you can do with it. I mean, Frank already showed you some wonderful examples. And anecdotally, we have a weather station just like the one up at the School of Conservation right next to Liberty Science Center down in Liberty State Park. And we had a snow sensor like we've had up at the School of Conservation. And just so happens it's an acoustic sensor that sends a signal down towards the surface and gets its response and converts that to, well, theoretically a depth of snow. Well, it was operating during Sandy and it recorded a 2-foot storm surge underneath our weather station. So it was a storm surge monitor, not a snow. So that just shows you the kind of water that got into the park that did that damage or and impacted the growth that Frank was talking about.
And Dave, that's 12 foot above sea level already. So that's how deep the water was there.
Okay. Yeah. It was really a surprise and quite impressive. But anyway, let's turn our eyes up towards Sussex County. And that's the emphasis I want to put on here tonight, both the School of Conservation, but then Sussex County in general. But always keep in mind that what we learn up in Sussex County can be applied in a comparative sense, for that matter, to elsewhere in the state. And that's what I love about the school. The students and the educators, the teachers can go up there and learn all about what's going on in that area and look at the weather station data, and then go back to their classrooms, wherever it might be, and compare what's going on in their neighborhood with what's going on up at the School of Conservation, because we have 65 weather stations around the state that behave and record similarly to the one up at the school. So anyway, there I am, Dave Robinson. I am a professor in the Department of Geography at Rutgers, and for the last 30 years, your state climatologist. I just opened with this one image to show you the climate of New Jersey and how it can vary. And up here in the snow-covered Sussex County, how it can be very different than down in snow-free South Jersey. This just from early March this year. Greetings from the State Climate Office. We are situated at Rutgers. I'm appointed by the Dean of the Agricultural Experiment Station via the decree going back to Governor Burns' era, and I've been sitting at Rutgers as a professor for about 33 years and 30 years as state climatologist. This is our website, njclimate.org, and I invite you to visit that, and you can link to our weather network by just clicking on the map there in the middle. But we're here to help people make weather and climate related decisions. We don't make the decision for you. We give you the information that enables you to make a weather climate informed decision. And of course, we're in the process and of monitoring the climate of the state to look for change, past, present, and look out into the future, working in collaboration with climate modelers, both at Rutgers and on the national and international scene. This wide, wonderful climate system, put yourself wherever you wish. It's a system. It has no beginning, no end, and it's loaded with spheres. And dead center in the middle of this image, human activities. The Anthropocene, as Frank mentioned, wherever you might want to decide it begins. I had a grad school professor who thinks it was 10,000 years ago. Others think it was with nuclear tests in the 1950s. And Frank, you put it about 1600. Take your pick. Humans are having an incredible impact on the Earth's climate system in conjunction with all of these natural spheres. Jersey, Sussex County, what a wide variation of weather and climate. That's what can make it come so alive to the students, because we've got the 4 seasons. We have a variety of different climate extremes. Generally not the worst of the worst if you're looking at tornadoes and drought and blizzards and such. But we can get hit pretty hard, witness Sandy and other events that do come along. And they can vary from place to place in the state. And that map in the top center from David Ludlam's early 1980s book on New Jersey's weather shows you 5 general regions that are either affected by topography and latitude or by surface characteristics, urban, agricultural, suburban, forested, and of course, maritime influence as well, particularly along the Atlantic, but also up into the Delaware Bay region as well. And looking to Sussex County, was no more impactful an event than the storm of August 2000 that deposited perhaps as much as 15 to 16 inches of rain in the matter of 12 hours or less over towards Hepatcon. It only rained an inch or so up at High Point, and Stokes probably didn't get more than an inch or two at the school. But it led to all kinds of flash flooding and landslides from a stationary storm system that just dumped and dumped for hour after hour up there. So these are the type of events that can happen. There's a question whether they're happening more often these days, and that's why we need to gather a lot of data out there. So how do we gather that data? There's our Rutgers, New Jersey Weather Network, our constellation of 65 or so stations. We've got a couple in the works right now that we're going to be adding to the network this summer, we hope, in Little Falls, down in Tuckerton, and maybe up in North Haledon as well. And we're keeping the rest of our stations going. This just shows you the lead page of our weather network. This shows you, as we saw earlier with a slide from Kerry, the station that we installed back in the first recording was what? It was December 6th, 2018. So you're not going to get a climate record out of this station quite yet. But we do have 2.5 years of record from this station. And you can see the variables that are recorded at the top there. We don't do soil temperature and moisture there. We didn't install the units, and the ground pretty rocky there. The snow depth sensor, which is actually right here, had to be brought back to its original owner, the previous occupants or managers of this site. Perhaps we can get a new one up there. But we have, in the State Climate Office, acquired this instrumentation and are replacing it elsewhere with new instrumentation as part of a deal for us to allow to keep this station here, because we did not originally purchase this equipment, but it's ours now, and it's going to stay at the School of Conservation as long as things are moving forward. So anyway, moving on. This is the school. There's the solar farm, and there's the station right there. Perfectly situated, not by World Meteorological Organization standards, which would have you be on the plains of Oklahoma or Nebraska. That's why we only have a 3-meter tower for wind measurements there. Some of our stations in open parts of the state have a 10-meter tower for wind, but that's okay. We got it into an open enough area that we can get some pretty credible observations of a number of the climate, weather, and climate variables. Whoops. Moving on here. This is every station on our network has its own web page. This is the web page at Sandyston with the National Weather Service forecast. We stay out of trouble in the state climate office. We don't forecast the weather. It's safer that way. But we do cooperate with the National Weather Service, who we feed these data every 5 minutes. The data gathered here and elsewhere in our network is fed to the National Weather Service locally in Mount Holly and out on Upton and Long Island for New Jersey weather forecasting, and to the National Center that's input into weather models that are used to forecast the weather in advance through computer modeling. So this is the station there. There's 5-minute data, gathered here. It's from yesterday. I pulled it yesterday afternoon. 5-minute data. We have daily data. This was yesterday, so the high was 81 up at Sandyston yesterday. It was warmer than that today. We have graphic data. It defaults to certain graphics. These graphs I generated yesterday. Top one shows solar radiation, obviously nighttime, clear skies in the morning, and then the clouds rolled in, and you went from radiation shining off the sides of the clouds, which enhanced the radiation, but then the cloud would come in and the radiation would decline, and back and forth and back and forth. So this is an ideal signature of a partly cloudy day. This is a signature for clear skies that happened during the morning. And this is your barometric pressure over the course of the day. So you can have your students, you can generate these different time series using the data from whatever station you might choose. This happens to be what it looked like yesterday afternoon. And you can see this is the Sandyston station, and the watts per meter squared values are quite low, even lower up in at High Point, and very high next to the side of a cloud in Charlotteburg. And there you can see the satellite image at the same time. So you can merge the station observations with what the satellites are seeing to wow and impress the students and really teach them a lesson regarding solar radiation and extend that into an environmental science lecture, perhaps, or activity. Forget the lectures. I'm a professor. What can I say? An activity. There's the solar farm just adjacent to our weather station. That's our weather station at High Point Monument, as you see there. It's not our top-notch weather station like we have at Sandyston, but it's got good thermistors for temperature. The anemometer right now, it's so windy up there. It broke again in late April, that really, really windy day in late April. So did our one up at the top of the Mountain Creek at Vernon, a very new one broke, and we've got them on order to be replaced. We have a better anemometer actually at Sandyston, but we've never gotten the funding to make a better station at High Point Monument. Another source of data, the COCORAS program that some of you may be aware of, a volunteer program of about 300 citizen scientists across New Jersey, just New Jersey. I just finished a 2-day workshop with the COCORAS program. There's 24,000 people signed up across the United States, Canada, and Canada right now. But New Jersey has 300 active observers, and they go out with a standard rain gauge. You must use a standard rain gauge once a day, go online or on your cell phone and enter the data. It goes into a national database. We grab it, make color-filled maps, and it's incredibly valuable. It really fills in the gaps on a daily basis of what our automated network's doing, and it's invaluable for snow measurement because we only have a couple of snow sensors out there in the field. This zeroes in, just showing you 1 day's worth of precipitation. You can see a little variation, but you can also see the concentration of observers in Sussex County. And this is over the last 365 days as of today, the number of stations in Sussex County that have observed. And you can see quite a few have only missed a week or fewer days of observation. Someone only put in 2 observation days of snowfall, not even liquid equivalent of the snow. But you can see we have some wonderful volunteers up in Sussex County, but never enough in Sussex or elsewhere around the state. So I would really invite you in your classes. We have classrooms involved. You don't have to observe every day. You can put in multi-day reports on Mondays. You can take the summer off, and so on and so forth. And then finally, to look in the long term, some of the things Frank wants to look at, we have Weather Service cooperative stations. And I went back today and looked at what stations in Sussex County were observing this year, actually in April of this year, April of 2001, April of 81, 51, 21, and the very first obs in April of 1895. And you can see Newton, no Newton. I could cry. Newton St. Paul Abbey was incredible observers. And they just closed up shop, and they haven't been a cooperative observer in quite a few years now. And you can see the numbers have declined. We've picked up 2 airports up there, and Highland Lakes is a new station. But the numbers, Sussex is the only one that's made it. Sussex 1 Northwest, that's 1 mile northwest of the post office is the designation. So anyway, but these co-op observations are daily observations, but look how far they go back. Without these observers, we wouldn't know the climate of Sussex County, let alone the entire United States. Now I just want to have fun and go through some incredible observations we get, and keep an eye on Sussex County, including the coldest station in the state on cold radiative inversion nights, 20 below up at Walpack. 5 below up at High Point on that particular day. Wind chill, 37 below at High Point at this hour of the day back earlier in that month in 2015. One of the hottest days on record in New Jersey, 94 degrees at High Point, 95 at Walpack, 99 in Sussex. It hit 100 down towards Newton. Back there in 2011. There was a thunderstorm going on down here in central Jersey. It lowered the temperature into the 80s. But one of the hottest days on record, and Sussex County sure shared in on it, but not so much here. It's in the mid 50s here in this afternoon in September, and it's 90 in southern New Jersey. Here's an inversion situation. It's 42 up at High Point. This early morning, I should say it's 5:30 in the morning on March 9th of 2020. And it's 23 in Walpack at the same time. 20-degree difference between the hilltops and the valleys. And that's a hilltop in Parsippany. And that's over at Pequest Fish Hatchery and in Hackettstown. So you got that inversion where it's colder below and warmer above. Oops. This is a case, always interesting. It's hard to tell, but that's cloud, that's fog in a valley here in mid-morning on this September day. And this is our Walpack station. And the sun hasn't come out there yet. So it's 10, 20 degrees cooler there, even than up at High Point, because of the lingering clouds in the valleys up in that neck of the woods. So you can see all the different things you can play with. Here, I've got to finish up, so I want to zip through some slides. This is just yesterday afternoon. Little cooler up at the higher elevations and pretty mild elsewhere. Statewide, very similar across the state, except there was a sea breeze. It was 65 at Seagirt at that time. Here was the minimum temperature yesterday, 38 at Walpack. The low was 53 at the Monument, an inversion warning. But that was the high during the day, 81 at Walpack, but got up to 76 at the Monument. As I recall, last year, it's been a couple of years since High Point Monuments hit 90 degrees. And last evening, 61 degrees at 8:25 in the evening, where it was still 78 over at Newark Airport. It cools off quickly. So these are the kind of things you can look at. Just want to give you one last taste about climate change that we see that's happening. This is something called At a Glance I use to generate these time series. I did it for Sussex County. These are annual temperatures in Sussex County going back to 1895 to 2020. This is a linear regression showing a warming of about 2.6 degrees per century. Then I decided I'd just run the linear regression from 1981 to 2020. And there it's warming at 5.8 degrees per century, double the rate that it was over the entire 20th and early 21st century. So it's really taken off. And this is when you began to see a human impact on the climate emerge from a very noisy climate system. And that's why I use the 51 to 80 period as the mean here, just before we began to see an absolute indelible mark of human activities influencing the Earth's climate. And this is precipitation, about 3.3 inches per century over the long term, and about 5.3 inches since per century rate since 1981. So we're getting wetter, we're getting warmer, but notice the interannual variability. There's 2011, thanks to Irene and friends, and there's 2018, 2 very wet years, but we've had some dry years as well. So of course, cut to this, and we don't have time to talk about this now, but this is something to talk about with your students. Humans are responsible for this change, particularly what we've seen in the last 40 years. And you can look at theory, you can look at the observations we've already just introduced, and climate models that suggest that. And that's all we have time for now, except to look briefly to the future. Sussex County is going to continue to see rising temperatures. Steady or increasing precipitation seems to be what the models are suggesting. And with more energy in the atmosphere, holding more moisture in a warmer atmosphere, warmer oceans, we're an ocean state, we can expect more extremes, more variability. Are we seeing it already? Perhaps, but we climatologists have to be kind of patient. We don't get the immediate gratification or condemnation of our meteorological friends. But we think we're seeing that in terms of extremes already. And of course, Sussex County may be beachfront property in a couple centuries, but nothing soon. But we do have to worry about this state, which has just such ties to our coast as well as our hills. And we're going to have to continue to deal with sea level rise in the decades ahead. And with that, you can introduce all sorts of impacts that we're already seeing, that the people who manage these different aspects of our environment and our health and such already are seeing. Whoops, got out of there a little too soon, but there I am. There's my email if you want to touch base. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you so much, Dave and Frank and Liz and Kerry. At this point, I'm going to actually put it on gallery view. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to share with our panel? Bruce, I saw your hand go up first. All you.
Hi, David. Those graphs you just showed from 1980 to 2020 for Sussex County are kind of alarming. Is that representative for other counties in New Jersey, or are other ones worse or not as extreme? How does Sussex relate to the rest of the state?
Yeah. Hi, Bruce. Yeah, great question. Actually, if you look at some of the numbers, Central Jersey, for some reason, is warming a little bit more. This was brought forth in a Washington Post article. a couple of years ago that actually won the Pulitzer Prize, their series of reports. But they also looked at Bacon in that report and how ice fishing had changed. So generally, it's across the state. And interestingly enough, the months that are warming faster are the shoulder seasons of winter: November, December, February, March. January is warming no faster than the summer's warming. So we even have monthly differences that we need to look into. Got a good master's student out there who wants to look at it. But generally, I think, and the warming in this region exceeds that in most parts of the country, except the northern plains and parts of the Rockies. And we don't have our finger on that quite yet, but I think it has something to do with our nearby maritime environment that is warming perceptibly as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for our panelists? I actually have a question, and this could be answered by anybody. So, Frank, you focused a lot on trees, and Dave, obviously, meteorological data. What are the other aspects if, individuals were to go up there to either do studies with a class or for graduate work or for whatever purposes? What are other things up there that are really good indicators of climate change that the New Jersey School of Conservation could be utilized for?
Well, one of the things that pops into my mind right away is sort of phenology. When things are starting to flower, when things start to come out. Now, and there's plenty of data on when things are flowering in and around the School of Conservation. And so looking at the trends that we're seeing, the earlier occurrence of flowers, the earlier occurrence of migratory species, those are types of things that's a really quick one to pick up on.
And as a matter of fact, just today, with this CoCoRaHS workshop I was involved with, the head of the National Phenologic Network of Citizen Scientists spoke. And I met her, and her husband's actually a climatologist. And they monitor like 1,400 different species, plants, all different types. And you might look that up. And I don't know if the school's ever participated in that, but you can get an app and just sit there, and it asks you questions about a particular plant you're looking at. How many leaves are on it? Is it flowering yet? So on and so forth. And that might be a wonderful activity for the school to maybe continue with, but certainly start with. I even think of looking at the water temperatures of the pond there. I know there's a lot of things going on in that pond, but
So,
Tanya, you guys.
Mike, if I could just jump in sorry, Tanya. I just wanted to just maybe do a little bit of a commercial for the School of Conservation and for the Friends in particular. We are open to any suggestions any of you might have in terms of research and programs there. We have a list of programs that we are on our calendar right now. But one of the areas that we want to develop further and want to have conversations with our researchers who formerly were there, and some of the college professors who were bringing their classes to the school. We have the opportunity for day programming really on any subject. We don't know what the future holds in terms of overnights. We will be discussing that further with the DEP. Vern Weintraub and Shane Russell are champion negotiators, and they'll be bringing a lot of the questions and concerns that all of you have been bringing to us, and the interest to get back there to do research. So, if there are subject areas, like you just said, Frank, that you want to pursue, we encourage you to send us a little mini proposal or reach out to us, and we'll get a form to fill out, and we'll run it by the DEP. All of our programs and research need to be approved by the department. We've been, successful thus far in getting everything approved. So I think as long as it's mission specific, and certainly climate change is mission specific to this administration, we feel fairly confident that we can move things forward. And Tanya, you were going to say something. You were there just recently as a staffer, and I'm sure have lots of great ideas.
Yes, thanks, Kerry. I just wanted to give a quick plug. I'm doing a teacher professional development workshop this summer at the School of Conservation, and it's focusing on the iNaturalist app. And Dave and Frank were just talking about phenological data, and that's another huge gold mine of data. We have a long-term biodiversity project that's running with that app at the School of Conservation. And so there's a list of species that we have identified there so far, but you can look at long-term data trends for each individual species, bloom time, first appearance of certain bird species, all kinds of things. So, that's another tool that teachers and educators in all fields could use to, link to climate data. So another interesting connection happening this summer.
Thank you. If I was keeping my phenological journey for better or for worse, I'm on the border of Morris and Hunterton, and the fireflies were out in my backyard last night. A little early, but yep. Here they are. On that note, I'm looking at the time. I do want to thank, on behalf of Angie and of course the New Jersey School of Conservation, Kerry, Liz, Frank, Dave, we appreciate not just your information, but what you are doing for our state and our citizens. And of course, all the work that I see many of us on this call are doing. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Again, if you have any questions or, want any information, please reach out to me at info@angie.org. And I could also funnel emails to others if you have questions. So everybody, thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll see you in person sometime soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Good night.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks.